Hi, everybody. I'm Dave Lundahl. I'm the CEO for Insights Now. Welcome to this issue of one of our webinars. And anyways, I'm going to share the screen here. I'm here today with a fantastic panel. We're going to have a panel discussion after some content that I will share on challenges and solutions to activating attribute insights for food product design. And so anyways, today I'm just going to share a little bit of the agenda. I'm going to kick this off with about 10 minutes of some content that some research that Insights Now conducted over the last few years. About some trends on consumer change. That's going to be followed by 20 to 30 minutes of panel discussion. And then the remaining time we'll dedicate to question and answers. So my panel, so we have Roxi Beck, Tia Raines, and Carl Fritscher. And I'm going to ask each of them to do a brief introduction on themselves. So go ahead, Roxi.
Thanks, Dave. Roxi Beck here with the Center for Food Integrity. We're a mission-based organization that serves the entire food system, and our mission is to earn consumer trust and confidence in this broad, wide, varied industry.
Tia.
Great. Thank you. Tia Raines, and with Ajinomoto Health and Nutrition. We are a Tokyo headquartered company that is an ingredient supplier as well as a consumer products company globally. Happy to be here today.
Great. Tia, how about Carl?
Hi, I'm Carl Fritscher. I lead Mintel's custom team in the Americas. Mintel is a global market research company, and we do custom consumer research, product attribute analytics, and also innovation strategy.
Fantastic. Now we want participation. We're looking to engage with everybody here that is joining us live today as we live stream this. So we have a question and answer period, as I mentioned at the very end. Anytime during this, if you have a question, please click on the little link below for Q&A, type in your questions, and then we'll do the best we can to address it at the end. So let's kind of get into the content. So kicking this off, this is some research that we conducted in September of 2019 and again in August of 2021. And it was about trust. And we were understanding that this is US primary shoppers. And we have been actually for the last 6 years tracking a group of consumers called clean label enthusiasts. These individuals, they read the labels on food products as well as other products that are consumer goods. And they make decisions based on what is on those labels. What are the ingredients? What are the claims? What are the health and wellness sort of nutritional parts of this and so on. So, but what was really interesting in 2019, you could see from this graph that clean label enthusiasts, over half of them, 52% in this sample. This is with a sample of a couple thousand people in this study. 52% claimed they did not agree with the statement, "I trust today's food system." And you can see that's different from the rest of the regular shoppers, which is only about 24%. Now, we reran this research last year, and we found that there was a dramatic change, a dramatic shift, where clean label enthusiasts, which are about 27% of the US population, dropped now to only 35% that distrusted the food system today. So that's quite a bit of an increase in trust, or you could say a decrease in distrust that we were able to observe. Now, further trying to understand why, if you look at this, you look at clean label enthusiasts in the comparison, that there's additional trust in federal regulatory agencies, trust is up for food companies, even though there's a long way to go there. Trust is up among state regulatory agencies. And trust is down for nutritional advocacy groups. These are the groups like the Food Babes and so on of the world. Also, though, trust is still down considerably amongst university scientists. And you see a really interesting comparison against, if you look at other sort of primary shoppers, you see that clean label enthusiasts are much more trusting of family members versus other primary shoppers, which is a really interesting component to think about. Now, in addition to that, we are interested in looking at institutional trust, how segments of our population of our primary shoppers are or are not trusted in the food system. And in order to look at this idea of institutional trust, trusting in large institutions like government and so on, we looked at people that distrusted the safety of vaccines. And what we found is amongst those that really are not comfortable with vaccines, distrust that, there is a 60% of those distrust the US food system. And the reasons for, again, you could see here, regulatory agencies are down, farmers are up, but this is a larger, basically a rural, mostly a rural component. And but state regulatory agencies are down, and university scientists are actually, in comparison, I should say, this is not, we didn't do this in 2019, but in comparison to regular primary shoppers, it's much less than university scientists. Which makes sense from what those that you would expect with regard to vaccines. Now, we also did a piece of research to understand this consumer change, and we wanted to understand implicit biases. These are biases that either when you have a specific, strongly held point of view about something, you will, if you see something that confirms that, you will tend to believe it, even irrespective of whether that's true or not. And the reverse, if something is disconfirming something that you believe deeply, no matter how well that is positioned, how much truth there is to that, people will tend to disconfirm that as well. And so what we did is we looked at sweeteners, and we looked at 7 different sweeteners, 2 groups of sweeteners that people tend to have very positive points of view, a group of sweeteners that people tend to have negative points of view, and one that's neutral. In fact, it's not even a sweetener at all, monk fruit. And what we did is we looked at headlines. We gave people headlines of stories about these sweeteners, either positive or negative. Some are true or false. And there are 28 headlines about these. And then we provided them from various different sources. We had 14 different sources, which we'll show you here in a minute. And what we did is we used an implicit test to understand whether people believe or disbelieve the headline. So example here with this from Google Scholar, reading this information, sweeteners you believe is, do you believe the headline, honey increases blood sugar levels in diabetics? And what we found looking at this confirmation and disconfirmation bias is that in 2019 to 2021, among clean label enthusiasts, that this sort of bias is decreasing in the population, which is really interesting. So the difference between if you have a strong positive point of view, the believabilities are increasing when you have positive information, and they are increasing even more when you provide things that you have a negative point of view that are also negative. And amongst those that have either trust or distrust vaccines, what we see is amongst those that distrust, the amount of implicit bias, especially on the negative side, is really, really larger than those that are other sort of primary shoppers that are more trusting in vaccines have more institutional trust. So these differences, further, we looked into is why do people have these beliefs about these headlines about sweeteners? And we see that it aligns with their core beliefs. This is amongst those that distrust. You see a greater amongst relying on your core beliefs. The source is not biased. There's less of that. And the content is provided by scientific experts. So there is a relationship between this sort of distrust and providing by science amongst those that have this institutional distrust. And content was also, the source, I should say, was also much more a key important driver in looking at believability headlines. As you can see here, where those that are distrust vaccines have much more trust whether it's true, false, whether it's positive or negative, it was from various different sources. So that said, there's a lot of change that is going on in the marketplace in terms of how these sort of consumer perceptions are changing attitudes and changing behaviors amongst consumers. So with that as a sort of way of thinking about, I'm going to stop sharing and we're going to go to our panel discussion to talk about the idea of what are some of the challenges and what are the solutions to activating food attribute insights for food product design. So I'm going to start with Roxi Beck. So in this world of change, what are some of the challenges you think in sort of winning back consumer trust in food systems?
Anytime we want to look forward, we prefer to look back and see if there's anything we can know or learn and apply. And the Center for Food Integrity starts and always reinforces with research. We really do err on the side of science, but it wasn't the hard bench science that was going to help us understand how we are to build trust as an industry. But we started with social science research and what we learned very early on with the intent of understanding how can we earn trust of the consumer for the full food system, is that we were a bit surprised about what the drivers were of trust. And so I think we need to start there. We want to have that trust moving forward. If we want to have transparency in labeling, we have to understand what's going to drive trust in the first place. Quickly, there were 3 drivers of trust in a meta-analysis that was done back in 2007 that really serves as our baseline research and on which we've built communications platform training programs and get that out into the full food system. The 3 drivers, first and foremost, are what our researcher, Dr. Stephen Sapp, called influential others. So that is everybody on this call. You are all an influencer to someone, Dave, as you indicated on that slide, whether you are a credentialed expert, associated with some sort of entity, or whether you're a family or a friend, you are an influential other. So people are looking for people throughout the food system to have a voice in these conversations. And depending on who you are and how you lean, some of those different voices will influence you in different ways. The second 2 drivers of trust have to do with the information that is shared with the consumer. The 2 types of information are, first, what Dr. Sapp called competence-based information. That is fact, science, data. These are the things we love in business and in decision-making because they're clear, they're concise, we can test and retest. But competence is something that's very important to showcase what we know. The other driver type of information is what Dr. Sapp called confidence. And this has to do with the perception of shared values or, per your research, core beliefs. Is this a person like me? Do they care about the same things I care about? Are they committed to and dedicated to a responsible supply chain, food ingredient, et cetera? When we said, wow, we've got all the people we could ever ask for in this system who are dedicated to doing the right thing and know their stuff, we then said, okay, if we can give consumers both the fact-based information and that, which displays the value system of the people working throughout the food system, are those two types of information needing to be presented at the same ratio, 50-50, or perhaps and hopefully we can just present more facts and win these debates. And the reality is, as you might understand or guess, we were exactly wrong with thinking facts would win the day. And in fact, 3 to 5 times more important that we showcase our values, who we are, what's important to us, why we do what we do, than it is to simply show up with the facts. So we have to come into conversations with the facts in our back pocket. But if we first don't, have a conversation that says, here's what we're working towards, we've paid attention to you, consumers, and what you're asking for in the supply chain for these intended outcomes of great nutrition, a healthy, lifestyle, sustainability metrics, animal welfare, all the things that go into the food system. If we can start there and paint the picture of why we do what we do, then we can come forward with the facts and science that actually drive our day-to-day operational decision-making.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Roxi. So a little follow-up question for you is that our research showed that the context of the sort of the source of information is really important. It's not just, I'm thinking about more from a media perspective and for various different channels. So do you utilize different channels for how you sort of broadcast out messaging to various different groups? And so how do you choose what channels to broadcast from or through?
Yes. If you have somebody who wants to use a channel, allow them. Consumers are using every channel. There's both the channel discussion, Dave, and then there's the application. A channel is a grocery store, right? An application is the front of label, it's the URL, it's the QR code. So there's kind of layers of the discussion about where you show up and what you and how much you share. But my answer is always, if you're not comfortable in one channel, you as an individual, find another, because the story of the food system needs to be told in every corner that it can be. And hopefully we do it in a way that builds confidence, because it's based on showcasing the people first and foremost behind the product.
Yeah, that's excellent. So let's move on to Tia. So Tia, as someone who works on the supplier side of the industry, what are some of the challenges in overcoming these implicit biases, about certain food attributes, such as specific types of ingredients, that there might be a point of view out there that, you're trying to overcome?
Yeah, thank you. We're a manufacturer of a couple of ingredients that are considered controversial by today's standards. So it's a topic that I deal with on a daily basis. And all of the concepts that you've brought up, Dave and Roxi, in terms of how to overcome some of these challenges with people's perceptions, we apply and we've learned firsthand. So I'll give an example with MSG, monosodium glutamate, which was discovered in 1908 and was safely used in the food supply without issue for many, many decades, until just an unfortunate cluster of events started to have people question the safety of the ingredient. There was no science to suggest that it was unsafe. Again, it had been used for decades, but in 1968, things changed when there was some question about whether or not the use of MSG in Chinese food was causing people to feel ill. Again, no science there. It was just an anecdote that somebody wrote into a medical journal. But in the context of the Vietnam War and there being a lot of negativity towards Asian Americans as well as Chinese food restaurants, it was enough to question the safety and start to link MSG to a cuisine, which MSG was discovered in Japan, not China, and then link an entire cuisine to this syndrome of people feeling ill after they eat it, which was an unfortunate situation and something that we've been trying to recover from. So in terms of how do you get over that and start to change consumer perception, as Roxi pointed out, it's not leading with facts. the facts are there for this ingredient and have been demonstrated over and over again. And you can tell people the science consistently, and it does not make a difference unless you can find a way to make that compelling to that individual. Maybe that's around their core values, or maybe that's some sort of emotional connection. Where we've had success with MSG is talking about its racist history, is pointing out that it's culturally inappropriate to be linking this ingredient to a cuisine that may or may not contain MSG, when other cuisines are also rich in MSG, such as Italian food or Mexican food. So that sort of connection with a social justice issue is enough to open people's eyes and maybe get them thinking differently about this particular ingredient. So when we think about kind of what the solution may be, or what elements are important to changing perception, it's having the facts in your back pocket, which Roxi brought up, but then it's finding that compelling connection with the consumer to allow them to open their ears and hear about the facts once you've kind of disarmed them with something that is a connection point to who they are.
Yeah, so finding that commonality. So if someone values what we call DEI, if someone really values that, that could be a starting point for a new sort of conversation.
Correct.
Fantastic. Yeah, so that's really interesting. So, okay, I'm going to move on to Carl. So, Carl, you are working for a company that has the largest database in the world, a global database that has basically, many, many attributes that are stored every day about products that come on the market. And I've been doing that for many years. So, with this sort of massive information, okay, what insights can we generate today from this sort of attribute level data to overcome some of these challenges that we're talking about today?
Yeah, so thanks, Dave. It's about 40 million data points every year across 86 countries of attributes. So it is very comprehensive. And I think to start with is just a marketer's reality that consumers don't create new products and they don't invent associations between products and benefits and concerns. They're taught them, right? Hot stove, burn hot. You're taught that, right? So often, when it comes to food and products and ingredients, we're taught them these associations very purposefully, and often by accident, and often unintentionally, but by marketers, by products that we see on the shelf, and of course, by each other and social media and the sources that you mentioned in your research, Dave. So expectations for ingredients and claims set in one category tend to set expectations in others, right? So if consumers have been taught to be suspect of titanium dioxide in their beauty and personal care products, why would they want it in their cottage cheese, right? This is an association that has been taught to consumers. And it's very hard now for a manufacturer to say, no, trust me, it's okay. Or the government to say, trust me, it's okay. Right? So what we encourage is to look for what I call bellwether categories, and I like to use, pet food is a great one to use, right? So across the United States, there's 90 million pet owning households, which I think statistically speaking is a lot. But I'll leave that to you, Dave, to figure out. But it's a lot. And what we've been taught as pet owners, what we've been taught by pet food manufacturers, starting with the indie brands, is that good dog food or good cat food should have a clean label. And what's a clean label? Well, it's been defined as something that has less than 5 ingredients. Ingredients that I recognize. The number one ingredient is meat. Ingredients with 1 to 2 syllables. Limited ingredient diet. That's a thing in pet food. Even benefits like joint health really started in pet food. And now we see them in sports drinks, right? But these are things that we see, we've been taught by companies that we trust, and now we expect those things in other categories. So, if oranges are healthy, tangerines are orange, maybe I should expect them to be healthy too. That's how it works. So what we tend to recommend to manufacturers is that you look for associations between attributes and consumer behavior to stretch and bend and expand, essentially through adjacencies. Look for positive associations and try to lift and adapt those. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Roxi, Tia, do you have any further comments or anything you want to add to what Carl has just brought up?
Yeah, I think the concept of consumers are taught, and therefore that puts an obligation, maybe even a burden on marketers to understand the role they play in consumer misinformation or consumer shaping of how they make requests or respond to what they see on labels. We see this, it's anecdotally because we hear this from different pieces and parts of the food supply chain and the people involved, but we see things in the marketplace like sodium-free water or GMO-free water. I've seen it, I've purchased it on accident. The reality is there's no such thing. The further reality is genetic modification is a technology that's used. It's not a thing that's in a product. But at the end of the day, when marketers are looking for differentiation in a marketplace in food where the margins are so incredibly slim, they're looking to stand out. And when they can say this is a benefit or this is an absence label claim that's going to make people feel not necessarily great about what they know they're opting into, but what they know they don't understand and therefore can opt out of, that's a real driver. So marketing departments will say, can we say this? They'll go to legal. Legal will say, absolutely, it's a claim we can verify, validate, not get in trouble with. And then start, the consumers start seeing the label on some products and not on others. And the consumer affairs departments and emails and, inquiry centers start getting inquiries. And they're having to be on the receiving end of something that, Carl, to your point, was well-intentioned, maybe accidentally, they fell into an opportunity because of that opportunity or desire for differentiation. But at the end of the day, the cost is consumer confusion and or a consumer learning that may have no, scientific backing. So while true, it's not entirely accurate.
And if I can just add, I think that puts us on this slippery slope to eroding trust in the food supply. When we allow that to happen and we allow, whether it's marketers or somebody else to write the rules that aren't grounded in science, I think that is going to ultimately unravel to a point that it's going to impact the entire industry and the trust in the food system. So Carl mentioned, clean label, 5 ingredients or less. Show me the science paper that says that a food product that has 5 ingredients is any healthier than one that has 7, 8, or 9. Same thing with the chemical sounding name or 2-syllable. And the fact that we've allowed that to happen and it's gained momentum, I just think is misleading to the consumer. And then ultimately at some point, it'll catch up with our industry and compromise trust in this entire food system.
Banana has 3 syllables. Should I be afraid?
Right. Obviously bad for you.
Yeah, this brings up, I think, a really important point in the question. And it goes back to I was at IFT and I was talking to the head of marketing for a very large ingredient company. And I was asking him about his marketing focus. Where does he spend? And I asked him about B2C. So how much of your spend is to really broadcasting about ingredients to consumers? And he said none. He said, however, I do support sort of the industry organizations or industry efforts to do that broadcasting collectively as an industry. So the question goes back. So Roxi, you're an industry voice, and there are other voices as well, So Tia, obviously you do some voicing to consumers, right? So how do we ensure that we have that voice out there So because we know if we don't have that voice, someone else is going to fill that void. So who's responsible? Who should be the ones doing that voicing? And how do we ensure that, you know, the voice of the scientists, the food scientists, and the nutritionists, and so on, the medical professional that really is grounded on this sort of science? How do you ensure? How do we do that? So as an industry.
Yeah. Well, I'll just offer an opinion, which is I think the manufacturers of ingredients do have a responsibility to help educate in some fashion. And I'm using in some fashion purposely, meaning that, you know, for some ingredients, it's just a transparent portal into either where they come from or what they do and their function within a food. For other ingredients, you know, it requires more of an educational campaign to ensure that the information is out there. Again, with the caveat being you can't lead with facts. You have to lead with a different approach to be able to reach those individuals and have them hear your messaging. But it's going to require a change in how a lot of companies are doing business. And I think for a B2B company in particular, they're not used to seeing budgets that are required to talk to consumers. It's a totally different echelon of funding that comes with that. But I hope, you know, maybe in some small way, the progress that we've made with one of the most maligned ingredients of all time will empower other manufacturers to step up and see that it is possible to help bring the facts forward, and maybe they'll absorb that budget to be able to do so.
I'll just add in there, Dave, that I mean the reality is if companies who find them listed as ingredients or flavors, spices, those types of companies have absolutely been shielded for quite some time because they haven't had to have that B2C mandate. The reality is the supply chain, because of consumers, because of advocates, and because of labeling that exists today, are going to be driving change backwards through the supply chain. This isn't a new idea. Project Gigaton with Walmart launched several years ago with really good and focused efforts to eliminate a gigaton of carbon in the supply chain. And they have that ability to do that through partnerships with suppliers. That's also something that we see, years ago it was sustainability, and then it was regenerative, and specifically tying to agriculture's impacts on the planet, food production's impact. And now everybody's talking about ESG really solidly as recent as 2020, just prior to the pandemic, where major investment groups are saying climate risk is financial and investment risk. And so we are going to be investing in companies who take sustainability very seriously. And sustainability, that word, is so much more broad than environmental implications with the onset of environmental, social, and governance, ESG. It's the impacts that companies are having in local communities, on local economies, and in local cultures, as much as it is water supply and soil health and food safety and all of the other things that we talk about in the food supply. So I think this should be a call to action to those who are involved in food, period, to be thinking about, at the end of the day, what are the attributes, what are the benefits, what are trade-offs? Because with every substitute, with different ingredients, with different considerations, with the number of syllables, there are trade-offs as it relates to the final food product.
Yes, you're bringing up a really, really good point. There's a lot of change going on both on the global stage and on U.S. in the federal government. The FTC just recently came out with a number of good new guidelines for to help investors, to understand sort of the sustainability sort of metrics and accountings that go with companies that people would want to invest in or are thinking about it. The SEC is coming up with new standards, and as is the U.S. Department of Agriculture. So the in terms of what is sustainability, as a term in the mind of the consumer. So so there's a lot of change. The International Standards Sustainability and Standards Board, that was just created last year, I think is going to have huge impact. Okay, so this said, is this sort of, and this is all going back to supply chains, it's going back to attributes that are used in the design of products. So do you all think that this is going to be a major change in the industry, as well as, because, so any comments about that?
I'll just say, I think it's going to stand up entirely new job positions or roles within companies, especially those first and foremost that are publicly traded companies. So that's where the ruling is coming, likely to be movement that publicly traded companies are going to have a mandate of ESG reporting. So yeah, I think it's going to, change the way companies are thinking. It's also going to put a prioritization for company leaders and their boards to be asking these very specific questions to understand how they can be impactful and improve, set your benchmarks, and then let's talk about how we can commit to improvements over time.
Yeah, so I'm going to go back to this idea of attributes, and I got a question for Carl, for anyone, but specifically to Carl, and it has to do with claims. Okay, claims are a really important way in which consumers can gain some trust. And it's a coping mechanism to things that they trust, like a claim or a mark, of some sorts that helps them to make better, more informed decisions. Okay, so how do you see, from your vantage point, how this idea of label design and claims is going to change the industry, to both help consumers make better decisions, but also help companies, align with their ESG initiatives?
Great question, Dave. And I will first say that I actually don't believe in change. I believe in acceleration. A lot of what we're seeing around us right now, I mean, since the 1970s, I will say, we've known pollution bad, garbage bad, grape nuts good, Dannon good, right? These are themes, we know this. It's just, there's an acceleration that's happening in the last maybe 5 years, and will continue for the next, 15, right? When it comes to claims, so to answer your question more specifically, I will say that what we're seeing, and what I think might help manufacturers in the industry get a handle on how to communicate effectively with consumers is, so while there is an unprecedented proliferation of claims, new on shelf is extremely important. Maintaining some growth, I mean, new product development is so essential. So there's a proliferation of claims, but I think that what we're seeing is a specificity of benefit that may be something that can accelerate or evolve in the way that products behave. Now, a lot of manufacturers aren't so keen on this because, well, there's a cola product that used to be right for every single occasion during the day, and now it's limited to certain occasions. And so this specificity of benefit also means that there's a fragmentation of how brands will be used and what portfolios need to look like and how they need to be managed, which creates a lot of weight on manufacturers. But I think what consumers are seeing and expecting is that they want personalization, they want unitaskers rather than multitaskers. So I would rather take this, and this for a sinus headache than take this. And I think that we're seeing that happen in food and beverage as well. That I'm creating my own palette, if you will, to fill my needs, and my needs change day to day, hour to hour, situationally. So I'm going to have a product that does this or a product that does that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Tia, Roxy, anything you want to add to that? we're going to kind of wrap up our questions with this one, because I think it's a good place to leave, and then we'll go to Q&A. But before we do that, anything further you want to say? And Carl, I'll let you wrap up anything in the end as well.
Yeah, I'll just build off the claims and maybe link it back to what I said before, which is I think the standard should always be around misleading the consumer. And I think if we use that as the barometer on every single claim, it hopefully would enable companies to reflect on whether or not they're being truthful with their consumer and not being misleading. And again, I think it just goes back to trust. So I would hope that we would get to that standard. I know that that may not be a competitive position for a lot of companies. They may see that as inhibiting their ability to market their product. But I just think as people that feed others, that we have to be held to a higher standard than perhaps we're being held to right now because of the role that we play in food. And I would hope that we would get there at some point, because it's in everybody's best interest. It's in public health best interest, as well as in the food system best interest.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just add, I think, Tia, this idea of a non-competitive marketplace over some of the attributes of food would be a really good, blissful place to get to. And some of the more recent research that we did that focused on agriculture and food system technology in food, one of the things that was surprising but was apparent in every single different technology that we tested and we tested for, was the thing that came up out on top with, if you as the manufacturer or the ingredient supplier can convey food safety, that's the most important thing, which in times past, if we would have done this research, 3 years ago, I don't know that would have been the top of the pile attribute that was most important. But the reality is the way that the globe has evolved or been, what's the word, Carl?
Accelerated, he said.
Accelerated, thank you. The acceleration of all the things that existed, but hit us at, at great speed and frequency and just amount have really caused us to put food safety at the top of the list. The other thing to understand is that food safety, food safety and healthiness or the nutritional benefits of food are almost unpackable at this time. In our consumer research, when we ask about, do you consider this food safe? Do you consider this food healthy? There's almost exact information coming back because people are not uncoupling those two ideas. Safety is about long-term safety and my long-term well-being as much as used to be about sanitary and phytosanitary standards in food production. So these are some of the different areas that I think, thinking about benefits and attributes, safety, quality, nutrition, sustainability are top of the pile. And not only, if you've met one consumer, you've met one consumer, right? Carl, to your point, I want to pick and choose my day-to-day life or hour-to-hour life is different. But the reality is that the newest generation of consumers, the basically 45+% of consumers that fit in both millennial and Gen Z categories, are thinking differently about what they want to put into their bodies for their long-term health. And they are very minded towards technology and innovation opportunities and how those can directly positively benefit their end goal for what the planet should look like, how animals and how humans are treated.
So what ingredient or attribute is do you get the most questions about, Roxi?
Yeah, so we actually don't do a ton on ingredients. We do things. What we would know as ingredients aren't probably the vast majority of what we test. We test technologies. So things like gene editing in plants and animals, cultured meat, the lab-based meats. These things that are technologies that are going in, GMOs, pesticides, chemicals, hormones, antibiotics, think about the full food supply chain, all different types of food. And there are a lot of things that are interpreted as something in my food, that creates an attribute that I may or may not want. The vast majority of people do not understand what it is they're opting out of. They certainly would not want to opt into things they couldn't, pronounce or, too long of an ingredient list. But the traditional sense where ingredient manufacturers are doing that type of testing, that's not not kind of our day-to-day. We absolutely can and, have done those from time to time, but they're part of the broader categories that we're looking into.
Great. Carl, any final comments before we go to our Q&A?
I would just add that if all of this seems a lot harder than it used to be, it is.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, this is a great point to add. So it's really hard to keep up with the acceleration that is occurring in consumer attitudes. You know, they're exposed to so many new stuff, you know, and
and consumers are really busy, right? So this isn't their fault, right? They're really busy. They hear one thing that, oh, this isn't good for me, or that this company had metal fragments in there, whatever. Consumers move on.
Right.
Because they need to. They're really busy. They have to pick up the kids. They have to do this, right?
Yes.
So they're not going to do the research to help you out.
Right. Absolutely.
We had a woman, actually several, that reinforced this statement, but in a focus group one time, trying to understand, how do you make decisions about food? For your exact point, Carl, we are so busy, we are overwhelmed. We have, you know, a couple of kids, a couple of dogs, 14 places to be at any given time, dinner needs ready, and I don't even have the ingredients, right? So the question was, how do you choose food, or how do you know, and who do you trust as it relates to the things that you end up putting in your shopping basket?
Yeah.
One mom said, you know, I'm part of a mom's group, and when I hear something is good for me or bad for me, I don't need doctors and scientists confirming it. When I have hundreds of moms who understand my life, I don't need anybody else. And that can be as frustrating to hear as a scientist, or for somebody in the system who's dedicated their life to this, you know, to the study of this stuff. But the reality is, who's the lifeline? Who shares my values, my stress, my concern, my skepticism? And if it's good enough for them, it's good enough for me.
That's good. Well, I'm just a reminder, people, to go to the Q&A sort of little app there, click in, ask any questions. You know, I'm looking for anything you have so we can continue this discussion. So while you're thinking about your questions, you know, I wanted to just mention one more thing. So next month, we're going to be our webinar next month at Insights, which will be probably the third Thursday in September. So just keep aware of that, everyone, to that date, and we'll send you an announcement. But this week we're launching a massive study at Insights Now for U.S. primary shoppers. And it's a study to do what we're talking about here. And it's a study to look into what are shoppers' aspirations. Okay, so what are they aspiring to be able to buy and to provide? And this is for food specifically, into their bodies, to feed their families. And what are their sort of, is it about nutritional things? Is it about the sustainability, you know, factors? Is it about price? You know, what are their aspirations, you know? And then we also, for various different types of categories that they would buy, and for moments of their life, what are they actually doing? So we want to really understand this gap, and what are the trade-offs that people are being utilized, you know, forced into, or just doing, just because of the complexities that consumers are being, you know. And so, so this piece of research, we're really excited about it. We're expecting to understand, you know, find people that have very high aspirations in food, some people very high aspirations in health and wellness, I should say. Others will be more about maybe sustainability issues that are important to them, but not everybody. Some people are going to be able to do, maybe they're able to afford, maybe that's a barrier. Other people are going to have different types of gaps. And other people, those sort of aspirations may be not as strong, you know, in terms of health and wellness, or, you know, maybe just about safety, you know, I don't know. But so I'm really excited about sharing with everybody that piece of research, because it's getting to, I think, what we've been talking about here. So I'm still looking for some questions and here that we can ask. So if some people can continue to click through, otherwise So here's one.
I'll throw something out there, Dave.
Sure.
I know it's something that this group had talked about, but with the speed of everything coming at us, and with the what I'll say, the urgency, or maybe the presupposition that we must shift, we must make changes in what we're doing in the industry to meet the demands, the changing demands of, or the rampant way they're coming at us. We can't get stuck in the game of whack-a-mole. And that's what's going to happen if we think we have to adjust every time there's a new need or a new ingredient people can't pronounce that they're going to opt out of. We do need to focus on those attributes, but this is something that absolutely has happened in the supply chain, where, you know, the industry said, hey, advocacy groups are saying loud and clear they don't want this. One example would be with cage-free eggs. And we did see that have major implications in all different facets of how egg delivery happens for consumers. There's retail, there's food service, certainly in ingredients, and, you know, companies that are doing food processing. And the reality is restaurants, food service, you know, food companies can harbor that change. They can figure out how they're going to make it work within their supply chain, because ultimately they're controlling that end product as a finished product. Where we've seen a real challenge in that conversation and in that situation has been with retailers who are saying, okay, you say you want this product with this attribute, right? Which was positioned as only focused on animal welfare, and here are the reasons why you should do this. And for those entities that said, yep, we're going to go cage-free, and by 2025, they're in a really difficult position, because cage-free eggs are not being sold today. Consumers are not buying those when they have the other choices available. What we would encourage anybody in the supply chain who's saying, how do we make decisions, especially where there are advocacy groups coming and saying, you must change this thing or this piece and part of your supply chain because it impacts this one thing. What you have to understand is everything in the supply chain with it, with the consolidation and institutionalization of food, is that when you shift one gear, a whole other set of others have changed.
Yeah,
so that in particular.
Yeah, perfect
animal welfare is important.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's environment, it's worker health and safety, it's food safety, it's the cost of food. All of those things have to be considered. So I would say, don't ever make decisions and quickly pivot to something where you haven't considered, one, the trade-off, but two, for the multiple implications that any one change is likely to create.
Yeah, that's such an important point. The whole idea, use an example of precision fermentation technology today that is making a lot of plant-based analogs for animal-based products. Things that are, incredibly, but that trade-off has maybe great environmental impacts. Are there other things that I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, but you have to look much more holistically. We got one good question here I'd like to pose to the group. And it says, are you seeing any trends in the ways that consumers segment? Okay, as more information becomes available now, as we're learning more, and then people assume, consumers can choose where and how to obtain their knowledge, all these different sources. So it's a fairly broad question, but any sort of trending information that any of the three of you are seeing?
I will start. We watch consumers and we watch trends, and I will say that there, just like everything else we've been talking about, there is a proliferation. And I think the biggest trend in trends and consumer trends is around situational trends. So some years ago, marketers used to say, well, somebody is a natural consumer. Mm-hmm. Oh, really? When it comes to your lipstick, or just when it comes to your cottage cheese? Right. And we're finding that consumers make these little trade-offs or these little decisions all day long, and because they can. Right? It's not like there's no longer 3 channels on TV and there's no longer 5 brands in my pantry. Right. So consumers are making situational choices about which trends they're going to be in, what consumer segments they're going to be in throughout the day. Now, there are some overarching drivers, let's say, around consumer behavior and segmentation. And frankly, the erosion of trust is one of them, right? So this isn't just about food. Let me just park government and politics over here, but that's another meeting, that's another webinar. So, I mean, sports, education, healthcare, who do you trust? If we were having this webinar 10 years ago, Lance Armstrong would have been a 7-time winner of the Tour de France. Today, he's a 0-time winner. Consumers didn't do that, but now they don't trust athletes. Oh, right. So all of this creates this erosion of trust. And that is something that we see as a sort of an overarching, like I said, a macro driver when it comes to how consumers are interacting with the world.
Absolutely. And that's in line 100% with what we've seen. Yep.
I will say there was an influencer, a food influencer we worked with several years ago, but she had an incredible example of that. Everything about plastics she knew needed to be avoided. She had very, very specific preferences related to food as well for how she chose those for her family. But anything housed in that would have ever been touched by a plastic, delivered in a plastic was absolutely out of bounds. But she said, but do not touch my Botox. Do not ever disallow me to have plastic surgery. I absolutely will opt in there because I can opt out of it everywhere else. So those trade-offs are alive and well in the mind of the consumer. Right. Categorically, right. Even from product to product in food, sometimes that matters.
Right.
We see that consumers don't realize this, but a lot people keep score throughout a day. So if you want wellness, you do 3 things that make deposits in your wellness, and that gives you an opportunity to make 2 withdrawals. So when your head hits the pillow, you feel good about yourself.
Yeah, that's good. Yep. Well, we need to get to a wrap up here. Tia, do you have any final comments on this part of our discussion?
Yeah, I would just, I guess, echo what Carl said earlier, which is complexity just has increased over time. And I know the human mind wants to reduce it to something that's very black and white, whether it's, it's a Gen Z consumer or a millennial consumer. But to everyone's point, I think we have to just accept the complexity and get comfortable with the uncomfortableness around complexity, because it's a totally different situation now, accelerated or transformed, however you want to say it. But I think there's so many different factors coming at play that we just need to embrace the fact that that we have to know it's complex and live within that framework.
Great. Super. All right. Well, I'm going to kind of as kind of a summary, I should say. I thank all 3 of you for a fantastic panel discussion. This is a complex issue. That's why we decided to have it, because it's important. And so I encourage everybody to tune in next month when we're going to be talking about some of the trends we're seeing in this area of looking at people's aspirations and what they actually do and the trade-offs they make. I think I'm looking forward to seeing that research myself and be able to talk about it. And last, again, thank you for everybody. If you want to share this, please share this recording. This is recorded today. So if someone that may be interested in some part or all of this, please do share it, and they can register, and then people can watch this or some part of it anytime they want. So anyways, with that, everyone, thank you panel. Thanks everybody for joining us today. And we will have a, great rest of your summer. Bye.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you.